The midday sun bathed the city in gold, pouring its warmth over the wide sidewalks, where children's laughter echoed like music and families bustled from ice cream stands to shady benches. It was one of those rare days when everything felt light, hopeful. The kind of day that made even the most tired soul want to forget the weight of the world. And that's exactly what Naomi Pierce intended to do. Naomi, 35, pregnant, and glowing with an inner strength that didn't fade even in her toughest seasons, wheeled herself carefully down the ramp leading into the gates of Coastal Breeze Amusement Park. She had insisted on taking her son out for the day, despite the warnings from her doctors to avoid stress and overexertion. Her pregnancy, already 7 months along, was considered high risk, and the wheelchair had become more of a necessity than a convenience. But Naomi was determined. She wasn't just growing a child, she was raising one too. And today wasn't about her discomfort or limitations. Today was about Emery. Her son bounced beside her, an 8-year-old ball of energy with eyes full of wonder and a map gripped in one hand like it was a pirate's treasure. His shirt, slightly too big, featured his favorite cartoon superhero, now faded from too many washes. Every couple of steps, he'd dart forward to point at something. A ride, a balloon, a game booth, then circle back to grab his mom's hand, even if only for a moment. Naomi smiled every time he did. That small act of affection reminded her of why she pushed herself so hard, because Emery deserved moments of joy, not memories of sacrifice. Naomi's husband, Darius, had planned to meet them later in the afternoon. He was a city official, a respected legal consultant who was currently overseeing the new initiative focused on law enforcement accountability, a passion project born from stories like theirs. At the moment, he was downtown in a high-stakes meeting that Naomi had encouraged him not to miss. "We'll be fine," she'd said over breakfast. "You show up for the city. I'll show up for Emery." Darius had kissed her forehead, lingering a moment longer than usual. "Call me if anything feels off." Anything, she had promised. But as she now navigated the amusement park with her son, she couldn't imagine needing to. The park buzzed with life. The scent of funnel cakes drifted through the air. Children shrieked from the tops of roller coasters, and bubbles floated lazily near the water fountains. Naomi let herself relax. This wasn't a hospital room or a quiet living room, filled with baby books and silence. This was joy. As they approached one of the larger rides, the kind that spun families in the air in giant colorful pods, Naomi spotted the accessible lane beside the general line. It was marked clearly, designed for those in wheelchairs, the elderly, and others who needed accommodations. She turned toward it without hesitation, adjusting her posture slightly as she wheeled forward. But just as she reached the entrance, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the chatter. "Hey, where do you think you're going?" Naomi stopped. A uniformed officer, standing guard near the entry point, walked toward her with a hardened look on his face. He wasn't park staff. His badge and posture said police, not amusement employee. His boots thudded heavily against the pavement as he approached. "I'm heading into the accessible lane," Naomi said calmly, gesturing to the clear signage. "My son and I are next." The officer squinted, then sneered. "You expect me to believe you actually need that chair?" Naomi blinked. Her smile vanished. "I'm 7 months pregnant," she said, her voice still composed but firmer. "And yes, I use this wheelchair for medical reasons." He scoffed loudly, drawing attention from nearby guests. A few parents looked over, frowning at the exchange. "Sure you do," the officer said sarcastically. "You people always find a way to work the system, huh?" Naomi felt her heart drop. "Excuse me?" "Don't act innocent," he snapped. "You look fine to me. If you can talk, you can walk. Get in the regular line like everybody else." By now, people were openly watching. Emery, standing beside her, looked up in confusion, clutching her arm tightly. "Mom," he whispered, "why is he yelling at you?" Naomi gently squeezed her son's hand, trying to keep herself steady. Her stomach had begun to tighten, not with pain, but with pressure. Stress. The one thing she was supposed to avoid. "I'm not trying to skip the line," she said, louder now. "I'm following the rules. The sign clearly states." "I don't care what the sign says," the officer barked. "You don't belong here unless you're really disabled. Don't play the victim." A hush fell over the immediate area. Parents pulled their children closer. A teenager filming nearby subtly turned his phone toward the scene. A grandmother shook her head in quiet disapproval. And then, without missing a beat, Emery dropped his map and reached into his pocket. He pulled out his small flip phone, the emergency one his father had given him. With trembling fingers, he dialed the number he knew by heart. He didn't even ask Naomi's permission. His small voice was steady as he spoke. "Daddy, something bad is happening. A police officer is yelling at Mom. She's scared." Naomi's eyes widened as she looked down at her son, Emery. But he was already describing the situation in whispers, turning slightly away to shield his words from the officer. He said, "Mom's faking, but she's not. You said to call you if anyone ever made her feel unsafe." On the other end of the line, Darius didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," he said. In less than a minute, the line went dead. The officer, meanwhile, had continued his berating, accusing Naomi of entitlement, laziness, even fraud. Every word chipped away at her calm, not because she believed him, but because it reminded her that there were still people in the world who saw her, not as a mother or a professional or a woman, but as a problem. But Naomi held her head high, refusing to be small under his shadow. "I don't need your approval," she said, voice shaking but strong. "I need to use the lane I'm allowed to use. That's all." "Oh, you're gonna need a lot more than that when I'm done," he muttered. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, a new presence arrived. A black town car pulled up near the park's security gate. The door flung open, and a tall man in a suit stepped out, his tie slightly loosened, his expression unreadable. People nearby whispered. Naomi's eyes filled with relief as she saw him. Darius. But the officer didn't seem to recognize him. Not yet. "What's this now?" the cop asked, turning toward the newcomer. Darius walked slowly, deliberately, past the crowd that had begun to form. Every step was silent thunder. And when he finally spoke, his voice was cold steel wrapped in fire. "You just made a very big mistake." The silence that followed Darius's words was unlike anything the officer had experienced before. It wasn't just quiet. It was a kind of hush that descended when power shifted hands without warning. The officer blinked, unsure why his chest suddenly felt tight. He studied the tall black man standing in front of him, his suit slightly rumpled from a hasty exit, his polished shoes clicking softly against the pavement as he approached. Something about him radiated authority, not the kind that came with a badge, but the kind that made others step aside without being told. Naomi sat frozen in her chair, her hand still resting on Emery's shoulder. She knew that look in her husband's eyes. Calm, controlled fury. Not the kind that exploded, but the kind that dismantled. The officer straightened his stance, putting a hand on his belt as if reminding everyone in the area that he was still in uniform. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" Darius didn't flinch. His voice, when it came, was clear and unyielding. "I'm the man whose wife you just humiliated. I'm the father of the little boy who had to call for help because he feared for his pregnant mother's safety." And more importantly, Darius reached into his coat pocket, producing a badge, not one of a police officer, but one that commanded just as much, if not more, respect. "I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Civil Rights and Law Enforcement Oversight in this city." The officer blinked, and then again, slower this time, as if trying to make sense of what had just landed in his lap. The crowd had grown, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Phones were out now, cameras rolling, not in amusement, but in accountability. "You assaulted my wife with your words, your attitude, and your ignorance," Darius continued, each word a scalpel. You verbally harassed a disabled, pregnant woman in public, mocked her medical condition, denied her rightful access to a federally mandated accommodation, and did all of this while armed and in uniform. I didn't touch her, the officer stammered. You didn't have to, Darius snapped. You touched her dignity. You stepped on her humanity. The officer shifted uncomfortably. She didn't look disabled to me. Darius took a deep breath, then crouched beside Naomi's wheelchair, taking her hand in his. Do you want to leave? He asked softly. Naomi, fighting back tears she hadn't wanted to shed in front of her son, shook her head. No, I want to finish this day, for Emery. He nodded, kissed her hand, and stood again, turning back to the officer. You heard her. She's staying. And so am I. A park supervisor arrived moments later, having been alerted by the growing commotion. A woman in her 50s with a name tag that read Lynn Operations Manager. She weaved her way through the crowd, her eyes wide with concern. What's going on here? She asked, looking from Naomi to the officer, then to Darius. Before either man could speak, a teenager from the crowd stepped forward, holding up his phone. I've got it all on video, he said. Everything. Lynn took one look at the footage playing, and her face drained of color. She turned to the officer, her tone clipped. Officer Travis, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from this family immediately. I'll be contacting your precinct. This behavior is not tolerated. Not in my park. Not anywhere. The officer opened his mouth as if to protest, but stopped when he saw the look in her eyes. He knew the line had been crossed. He turned, muttered something under his breath, and began to walk off. But Darius wasn't finished. You'll stay, he said firmly. A formal report will be filed, and your body cam footage, if you had it on, will be reviewed. If it was off, that's another violation. The officer froze. Then, without a word, he stepped aside and waited silently by the fencing, red-faced and humiliated. Lynn turned to Naomi. I am so sorry this happened. Please let us make this right. Anything you need today, rides, food, private space to rest, we'll handle it. No charge. Naomi gave a quiet nod. Thank you, she said softly, her voice nearly breaking. Just don't let this happen to someone else. Lynn nodded and walked away to coordinate with her team, visibly shaken. Emery tugged at his father's hand. Daddy, is Mom going to be okay? Darius bent down, wrapping his arms around his son. She's strong, Em. But what happened shouldn't have happened. And it's my job to make sure that man learns that. But will you fix it? Darius looked at Naomi, then back at his son. Not just fix it, change it. Later, while Naomi rested in the shade and Emery rode a carousel, still watched closely by a park staffer assigned to escort them for the day, Darius stepped aside to make a few calls. Each one escalated the situation a level higher. Internal Affairs, Civil Rights Legal Division. A citywide policy task force meeting was arranged that very afternoon. But it wasn't just about one officer anymore. It was about the system that allowed him to wear the badge without the awareness, the empathy, or the training to interact with the people he'd sworn to protect. Darius's reputation for justice wasn't just built on courtroom wins or polished speeches. It was built on standing in moments like this, when it would have been easier to walk away. His anger wasn't rage, it was purpose. His voice wasn't raised, it was sharpened. And by nightfall, the wheels of consequence were already turning. That evening, as they left the park hand in hand, Naomi whispered, You didn't just defend me. You defended every woman like me who's been silenced. Darius looked at her, eyes soft. No one silences you, Naomi. They just don't realize who they're dealing with until it's too late. They drove home quietly, the hum of the tires on the road soothing Emery to sleep in the back seat. Naomi leaned her head against the window, watching the city pass by. She thought about how many women had suffered like she nearly had, without a voice, without someone to call. But not this time. This time, the call was made. And the city would never forget it. The city didn't sleep that night. Not for Darius Bennett. While most of the streets grew quiet and families slipped into peaceful dreams, Darius sat awake at the dining room table, his laptop open, phone buzzing beside him with every incoming message. His hands moved with precision across the keyboard, typing up a formal complaint addressed to the police chief, civil oversight committees, and the mayor's office. Every word was chosen carefully, not to inflame, but to illuminate. He included the footage from the teenager who had recorded the incident, attached Naomi's medical documentation outlining her high-risk pregnancy and mobility limitations, and cited ADA laws that had been clearly violated. He referenced training manuals, department policy, and past incidents involving Officer Travis. By the time the document was complete, it was 24 pages long and bulletproof. He didn't write it just as a husband. He wrote it as a man who had spent the last decade trying to fix a broken system from the inside out. At 3:12 a.m., he hit send. By 8:00 a.m., the city was buzzing. The video had gone viral overnight. Not just in their city, but across the country. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag wheelchair justice. Hashtag stand for Naomi. Hashtag disabled not invisible. Celebrities, activists, and news anchors were sharing the video, their captions ranging from outrage to praise for Darius's composure. But what struck people most wasn't the confrontation, it was what came after. Naomi's quiet dignity, Darius's calm authority, Emery's innocence. The contrast between cruelty and compassion was undeniable. Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, Officer Travis sat in a small, cold room at the Internal Affairs Building, stripped of his badge for the time being interviewed under oath. The look in his eyes wasn't anger, it was confusion. He had operated like this for years, unchecked and unquestioned. But the tide had turned, and he had become its cautionary tale. Back at home, Naomi was still trying to process the whirlwind of the previous day. She sat on the couch, legs curled beneath her, one hand resting gently on her belly. Emery was watching cartoons, his laughter more hesitant than usual. Naomi knew he was still worried. She could feel it in the way he glanced at her, like she might disappear if he looked away. "Come here, sweetheart," she said softly. He climbed onto the couch beside her, his little body curling into her side. "You were really brave yesterday," she whispered, stroking his hair. "Calling your dad like that. You protected me, just like a superhero." He looked up at her, uncertain. "But I was scared." "That's what made it brave," she smiled, kissing the top of his head. He let out a little sigh and laid his head on her stomach. "Is the baby scared too?" Naomi chuckled softly. "No, baby. She's safe, just like us." He looked up again. "It's a girl." Naomi smiled wider. "That's our secret, for now." Later that morning, a knock came at the door. Darius answered, surprised to find 3 reporters and a city councilwoman standing on the porch. The reporters wanted interviews. The councilwoman wanted action. Inside the living room, Naomi adjusted her headscarf and took a deep breath. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't chasing fame. But this was bigger than her. So she told her story. Not just about the day at the amusement park, but about every time she had been questioned for parking in a disabled spot or stared at for needing assistance. Every time someone assumed she wasn't working hard enough, wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't disabled enough. She spoke with clarity and calm, never raising her voice. Her words carried weight, not just because of what she said, but because she had lived it. By the afternoon, Darius was on a Zoom call with city officials and legal advisors, while Naomi was on her second interview of the day. Messages were flooding in, some from strangers thanking her for speaking up, others from women sharing their own stories of being dismissed, disrespected, or dehumanized. But not all messages were kind. Darius received one that simply read, "People like her are always looking for trouble." He closed the message, jaw clenched. He had been fighting these kinds of sentiments his entire career. But now it was personal. By evening, there was a knock on their door again. This time, it wasn't reporters. It was Officer Travis, in plain clothes. No badge, no backup. Darius opened the door, staring at the man who had humiliated his wife less than 24 hours ago. Naomi stood behind him, Emery watching from around the hallway corner. I came to apologize, Travis said, voice low. I didn't expect all this. Darius didn't move. That's the problem. You never expected someone to fight back. I wasn't trying to hurt her. You did, Naomi said from behind Darius. Her voice wasn't angry. It was exhausted. You didn't care what I was going through. You didn't even look at me like a person. I messed up, Travis mumbled, looking down at his feet. I know that now. Darius exhaled slowly. You didn't just mess up. You abused your power. And that's what we're going to fix. For every woman you made feel small, for every child who saw that and learned to be afraid. Travis looked up, his eyes meeting Naomi's. I'll take whatever consequences come. You already have, Naomi said. But it's not about punishment. It's about change. Darius nodded. You want to make it right. Don't just say sorry. Testify. Speak out about what training you didn't get, what bias you didn't address. Be part of the change, or step aside. Travis stood there for a long moment, then nodded once and walked away. As the door closed, Naomi leaned her head against Darius's shoulder. Emery came running into the room, wrapping his arms around both of them. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But something had started. A movement. A reckoning. A light in a system built to keep people like Naomi in the shadows. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. She felt powerful. She felt ready for whatever came next. The next few days blurred together in a storm of interviews, city meetings, and unexpected visitors. Naomi had become a reluctant symbol, her quiet strength and unwavering grace capturing hearts far beyond their neighborhood. She didn't seek the spotlight, but now that it found her, she decided to use it not for herself, but for every person who had ever been overlooked, silenced, or shamed for simply needing help. Still, the spotlight came with its shadows. One morning, as Naomi was making toast for Emery and humming softly to herself, a brick crashed through their front window, sending shards of glass skittering across the floor. Naomi screamed, instinctively pulling Emery behind her. Darius came running in from the other room, his heart pounding. There was no note attached, no message, but the message was clear. You think you're helping, he muttered, staring at the shattered glass. But some people just want the silence back. Naomi sat on the couch, hugging Emery close. Her hands were shaking. It's not just about us anymore, she whispered. Darius nodded, already dialing the police. This time, not to file a complaint, but to protect his family from retaliation. A different kind of danger now loomed, not from uniforms, but from faceless cowards who feared change. The officers who arrived were polite, even sympathetic. One of them knelt to check for security camera footage on the street. We'll do everything we can, he said. Darius appreciated the sentiment. But he knew the truth. Most hate crimes didn't end in arrests. Fear didn't leave fingerprints. Still, Naomi refused to be silent. She refused to retreat. That evening, instead of canceling her appearance at a local university panel on racial equity and law enforcement, she showed up in person. She wore a simple blue dress and the same headscarf from that day in the amusement park. Her voice didn't shake once. I'm not here because I want to be famous, she told the packed auditorium. I'm here because I want my son to grow up in a world where his mother is respected, where his sister will be born into safety, not silence, where disability is not treated like a character flaw or an excuse, and where officers remember their badge is supposed to protect, not persecute. The audience rose to their feet in applause. But that night, after Emery had fallen asleep and the house was still again, Naomi finally allowed herself to cry. Not because she was scared, but because she was tired. So deeply, achingly tired. Darius found her in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair they'd just assembled. She was holding one of the baby's tiny onesies in her lap, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep doing this," she whispered. Darius knelt beside her. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said gently. "You just have to keep showing up. And I'll be right here, showing up with you." Naomi leaned into his shoulder, and for a moment they sat there in the soft hush of the nursery, two people who hadn't asked to be symbols, but who had become a force together. The next morning, everything changed again. The mayor called. Not her assistant, not a city liaison. The mayor herself. She asked Naomi and Darius to attend a private meeting with her and the police commissioner, not to smooth things over, but to collaborate, to listen, to build something better. Darius was skeptical. This could just be damage control, he warned, as they pulled into City Hall. Naomi looked out the window, then back at him. Maybe, but maybe it's a door. They entered the room to find the mayor standing, not seated. She was an older woman with tired eyes and an outstretched hand. "I owe you an apology," she said, skipping any rehearsed formalities. "And the city owes you much more than that. We've failed too many families like yours. I'm not going to offer excuses. I'm going to offer opportunity." She gestured to a stack of papers on the table: policy reforms, training guidelines, inclusion initiatives, and most importantly, a proposal to launch a task force that would include civilians like Naomi, educators, activists, even teenagers, alongside law enforcement. Naomi looked at the folder, then back at the mayor. "And if I say no?" The mayor didn't flinch. "Then I'll keep trying. But I hope you'll say yes, because I've seen what happens when the wrong people have the loudest voices. I'd like to help amplify the right ones." Naomi slowly picked up the folder. She had never imagined herself in politics, never imagined sitting across from a city's top brass, being asked to help shape law enforcement training programs. But now here she was. Back home that night, she sat on the porch with Darius, watching Embry ride his scooter in lazy circles down the sidewalk. "You think I can really do this?" she asked. "I think," Darius said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "You've already started." That night, Naomi made a decision. She would say yes, not just for her family, but for every family who had ever been told they were too small to matter, for every woman in a wheelchair who had been asked to prove her pain, for every child who had watched their parent be humiliated in public. The next day, the city made the announcement official. Naomi Bennett, community leader, activist, member of the newly formed Equity and Justice Task Force. But before she signed the final paperwork, she made one last stop. She went back to the amusement park. Not to relive the trauma, but to reclaim it. She rolled through the gates, head held high, Emery's hand in hers, and a quiet smile on her face. Families moved around her, some recognizing her from the news, others just offering small nods of respect. When she reached the ride where everything had begun, she paused. Then she turned to Emery and said, "Want to go again?" He looked up at her and grinned. "Only if we race to the front this time." And this time, when they approached the accessible lane, the staff member smiled warmly and said, "Welcome back, Miss Bennett. Right this way." The world had not changed overnight, but it was changing. One voice, one stand, one brave act of refusal at a time. The city's heartbeat had shifted. It wasn't seismic, not yet, but it was unmistakable. Naomi Bennett, once just another face in the crowd, had become a voice people listened to. A mother who had simply wanted a peaceful day with her son had turned into a force compelling institutions to confront what they had ignored for years. But the attention, while mostly positive, came with a weight Naomi never anticipated. She woke earlier than usual now, not because she wanted to, but because her mind rarely rested. Every morning she brewed her favorite cinnamon tea and sat by the nursery window, watching the neighborhood stir to life. Mail trucks humming, kids dragging backpacks, dogs barking in sleepy yards. And in those quiet moments, before Emery rolled out of bed and before the headlines updated, she let herself feel the ache of everything they'd been through. There were messages in her inbox from strangers, some thanking her, some sharing their own painful stories, and a few that chilled her with their venom. But Naomi responded to the ones that mattered. She didn't want to be a symbol without a soul. Darius had taken on a more active role in their household lately, quietly supporting her rise while juggling his own legal career. He prepped Emery's lunch with colorful sticky notes of encouragement, drove him to karate class, and even painted the nursery ceiling sky blue with tiny stenciled stars. But beneath it all, he carried a protective tension. A lawyer by profession, he knew how easily public figures, especially black ones, could be twisted into caricatures or scapegoats. He watched every interview Naomi gave, standing just off camera during events, scanning rooms with the instincts of a man who refused to let his family be blindsided again. One morning, Naomi received a letter in the mail. A real one, handwritten, no return address. It was from a woman named Evelyn, who identified herself as the sister of Officer Grant, the officer who had harassed Naomi at the amusement park. Naomi stared at the letter for a long while before opening it. Darius noticed her stillness and sat beside her silently. "Dear Mrs. Bennet," it began, "I don't expect you to read this. I wouldn't blame you if you threw it away. But I felt I had to write. My brother, he's broken. Not because the world saw what he did, but because it made him finally see it too. We grew up in a household that didn't teach us to be compassionate toward people who were different. We were raised on suspicion, not empathy. I've tried for years to help him see things differently, and he wouldn't listen. But now he talks about you, about your strength, about your calm, about the way your son stood up for you. He says he doesn't deserve forgiveness, and maybe he doesn't, but I just wanted you to know. Something in him shifted. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You changed someone who most thought was unchangeable." Naomi folded the letter and stared out the window. It wasn't forgiveness she was looking for. It wasn't redemption. But it meant something deep and quietly powerful, to know that even the ripples of her pain had stirred something human in the man who caused it. Later that day, the mayor's office called again. They were preparing a new citywide initiative on bias training, accessibility, and equitable public service. And they wanted Naomi not just as a figurehead, but as the lead consultant. Her lived experience, they said, was more valuable than any bureaucrat's resume. Naomi hesitated. "I'm not trained for this," she said. The aide replied softly, "You lived it. That's more than enough." She agreed, but only after she had one conversation first. She visited her old high school teacher, Ms. Lorraine Tate, a retired woman with silver braids and a memory sharp enough to still quote Naomi's senior thesis. Miss Tate welcomed her in with tea and an embrace. "I knew you'd be something, baby girl," she said with a warm chuckle. Naomi sank into the couch. "I just don't want to mess this up." Miss Tate gave her a look. "Naomi, change doesn't come wrapped in guarantees. It comes with scraped knees and trembling hands. But that doesn't make it any less powerful." So Naomi said yes. And just like that, her days transformed again. She sat at round tables with legislators, spoke at schools about dignity and access, and helped design training modules that challenged officers to confront their biases, not through shame, but through empathy. Meanwhile, at home, Emery grew more curious about the world his mother was changing. He started asking questions about justice, fairness, and why some people were treated differently. Naomi answered with stories, real ones, because she wanted him to understand both the hurt and the hope. "Mom," he asked one evening as she tucked him in, "do you think that cop is sorry now?" Naomi thought about the letter, about the broken window, about the day in the park. "I think," she said softly, Sometimes people don't understand the pain they cause until they see it in someone else's eyes. And sometimes that's the beginning of their healing too. He nodded like an old soul and hugged her tightly. I'm glad you're my mom. Naomi kissed his forehead. Me too. That night, Darius received a call from a major publication wanting to do a feature on their family. Not a scandal piece, but a profile on courage and community. Naomi wasn't interested in fame. But if her story could open one more heart, or save one more person from experiencing what she had, then maybe it was worth telling. Still, she made one thing clear. This wouldn't be about her alone. She asked the magazine to include stories from other families in the city, people with disabilities, survivors of profiling, parents of children with special needs. If her voice had become a microphone, she was going to pass it around. And just like that, the narrative expanded. It became less about one incident and more about a movement. Less about one woman and more about all of them. A community waking up. A city beginning to listen. A country on the cusp of change. The auditorium was packed, but it wasn't the kind of crowd that came for entertainment or spectacle. It was quiet, electric with anticipation. Rows of city officials, police officers, teachers, students, and everyday citizens filled every seat, their eyes fixed on the stage where Naomi Bennett sat alone in a pool of warm light. A single microphone stood in front of her, and behind her was a banner that read, "Compassion in Action, Building Bridges Through Justice." The event had been a year in the making, a year since that day in the amusement park, a year of growth, pain, and transformation. Naomi didn't recognize herself in the mirror some mornings, not because she'd changed in appearance, but because of the sheer magnitude of what she had become. A symbol, yes, but more importantly, a leader. She took a deep breath and looked out at the sea of faces, then down at her hands resting gently on her lap. Emery and Darius sat in the front row, eyes gleaming with pride. Just behind them was Miss Tate, her former teacher, who had traveled from her quiet retirement to be part of this moment. Next to her sat Evelyn, the officer's sister, and to the surprise of many, a few rows behind, sat Officer Grant himself, his posture humble, his eyes shadowed with remorse. Naomi cleared her throat, then leaned toward the microphone. A year ago, she began, her voice steady. I was humiliated in front of my son. I was called a liar. I was told that my struggle wasn't real, that my wheelchair was a convenience, that my pregnancy didn't matter. And for a moment, I believed I was invisible. The room held its breath. But I wasn't, and neither are the thousands of others who live every day fighting to be seen, fighting to be respected, fighting to be heard. I didn't want to be a voice for anyone else at first. I just wanted to survive the moment. But sometimes surviving is the loudest protest. Applause started slowly, soft and unsure, but quickly grew into a steady rhythm of hands clapping not just for her words, but for the journey she represented. Naomi paused. Today, I am not here to shame. I'm not here to condemn. I am here to remind all of us that power does not lie in titles or uniforms. It lies in how we treat people when we think no one is watching. Her words echoed in the auditorium like a ripple across still water. Later that evening, after the speeches, after the hugs and congratulations, Naomi found herself alone in the corridor behind the stage. The lights were dimmer, quieter here. She leaned against the wall, exhausted but proud. Footsteps echoed behind her, slow and uncertain. She turned to see Officer Grant standing several feet away, his hands loosely clasped in front of him. His eyes were wet. I don't expect you to talk to me, he said. Naomi didn't reply immediately. She watched him. The man who once mocked her in front of her son, now standing with shoulders hunched and voice trembling. I was raised to think toughness meant dominance, he continued. That if someone challenged authority, they were wrong. But what I did to you, it wasn't about authority. It was about my own ignorance. And I see that now. Every day I wake up knowing I hurt someone who deserved protection. She took a step closer, her eyes calm but firm. "And what are you doing with that realization?" He nodded, almost to himself. "I joined the department's reform unit. Volunteered. I'm going through bias retraining. I talk to recruits now. I tell them the story. Your story. I ask them what they would have done differently. And I remind them that a badge means nothing if you can't see the human in front of you." Naomi studied him. There was no theatrical apology. No rehearsed tears. Just a broken man trying to rebuild. And maybe that was enough. "I'm not here to forgive you," she said quietly. "But I hope you never stop trying to earn that forgiveness from the world. From yourself." He nodded once. "I won't stop." As he turned and walked away, Naomi leaned against the wall once more, the weight of the moment settling over her. She didn't need an apology to heal. She had her truth, and that was enough. Weeks passed, and Naomi's work expanded. She helped launch a mentorship program, pairing police officers with community advocates. She joined panels on accessibility design for public spaces. She spoke at Emory School about bravery, not the kind in comic books, but the kind it takes to speak up when it's hard. And at every turn, she included others, amplifying voices that had long been silenced. Darius, ever the quiet anchor, had taken a sabbatical from his law practice to focus on advocacy full-time. He and Naomi created a foundation, Stand Tall, aimed at supporting families affected by discrimination and inequality. Emory became a symbol of youthful courage, and though the media occasionally painted him as a child hero, Naomi and Darius kept him grounded. He still had chores, still had bedtime, still had to finish his homework before playing video games. But he knew, deep in his little heart, that his voice mattered. One afternoon, while preparing for a city council meeting, Naomi received a small package in the mail. Inside was a key. No note, just a simple silver key with the number 309 etched into it. Confused, she called the return address listed on the package. It belonged to a hotel downtown, one she had never visited. That evening, curiosity got the better of her. She drove to the address and was greeted by the concierge with a warm smile. "You must be Ms. Bennett," he said. "Room 309 has been prepared for you, courtesy of a friend." She took the elevator to the third floor. The key slid into the lock smoothly, and when the door opened, her breath caught in her throat. Inside was a room transformed into a gallery of memories. Photos of Emory, her, and Darius, newspaper clippings of her story, letters from people she'd helped, and in the center, a quote etched onto a glass panel. "Strength is not in the absence of pain, but in the decision to rise anyway." Tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't know who had done this. Maybe Evelyn, maybe someone from the mayor's office. But it didn't matter. What mattered was this. The world had changed because one woman refused to be silent. Naomi didn't see herself as a hero. She was a mother, a fighter, a believer in change. And though the journey wasn't over, she had already transformed tragedy into triumph, not just for herself, but for every unseen voice she now helped bring into the light.